good and simple.
And
Special
it's a
version of
pleasure.
Steph Curry's signature
It's an honor
Under
to be
Armour
here
sneakers go
on the
sale,
night
and
of
it's
the
all thanks
Shahada.
to a 9-year-old Napa girl. You might remember in
I hope
November,
everybody's
Riley
doing
Morrison
well.
wrote this letter to Steph Curry.
And most of you, I think, know me.
Sneakers
We
weren't
have
offered in the girls
crossed
section of
paths
the company's
before at
website.
different times.
Well, Steph changed that, and he went a lot
it's always
further.
good to
He
see
and Riley
you.
met in Oakland yesterday so that
today,
he could unveil the
you know,
Curry
I wanted
6
to basically
United We
share
Win colorway in celebration of International Women's Day.
It's a really special experience.
There is a lot that is going
I
on
never
in the
imagined
immigration
that
scene.
this would happen. I'm really happy I wrote that letter.
One of my new things, you know, just to bring you up to speed because we haven't talked in a while.
Really happy you wrote back.
One of the new things that I'm doing nowadays is I'm also
Riley
teaching.
helped design the shoes sock
at Barry
liners
Law
with
School,
inspirational messages
on
like
Friday morning.
"Be fearless"
I go there,
and
teach
"Rock
a
the
3-hour
curtains."
class
Proceeds from
on
the shoe sales
immigration
will
law.
fund an annual scholarship for female
So,
Bay Area
alhamdulillah, I'm
students.
really enjoying that. You know, I think that educating is one of those things that I enjoy, and I feel honored to do.
Okay.
And, Adam, mashallah, he is a very bright 10th grader.
Now that's good and simple.
Seeing him in the near future sitting over here in my place talking to you about law. We don't know about what type of law, about some type of law, right? So if you help me, Adam, maybe distribute some of these. Okay. This is basically a Know Your Immigration synopsis that Adam is going to help distribute. Most of you know me, but just to recap, you know, my name is Shahzad Ahmed. I was born in Karachi, Pakistan, and I was about probably the age of this young man right here, who's walking over here. When I came to the United States, I did all of my schooling over here. That was not planned. He just happened to be did all of my schooling, education in the United States. I think I took interest in immigration partly because of my people, my community. They needed the help. They had a lot of immigration questions. So when I was in law school, then it seemed natural. And alhamdulillah, I have been blessed in that field. I feel like I have acquired a lot of knowledge related to immigration. I became board certified as an expert in immigration. That's something that less than 7 or 8% of the lawyers achieve. So, but it's also a passion. You know, I enjoy sharing that knowledge with my people, with my community. I think many of you are from Tanzania. Am I correct? Anybody not from Tanzania here? No, I'm just joking. But most people are from Tanzania, many of them are. If you saw some of the travel advisories from the U.S. Department of State, there's a travel advisory on the U.S. Department of State website about Tanzania, that there are increased crimes, there is increased terrorist activity, you know, so-called terrorist activity going on. And why I bring that up is just to let you know that if you are traveling to Tanzania, or if you are from Tanzania, then at the airport, you may be seeing enhanced screening just based on that latest advisory that was placed in the Department of State. So that's one thing to look out for. And then another thing, I didn't do a long PowerPoint this time, it's just a short one. Oh, I didn't know I'm on there. Let's see. We can get it to click. Oh, there's a short video. Basically, there are some developments, immigration developments. We'll talk about airport screening. We will talk about filing for adjustment of status, green card, citizenship cases, what's going on, how these cases are being treated nowadays. We'll talk about that. Let's start with a short video. Basically, what's happening is, and who is here on the media team? If they can just get ready to start running the video. Just give me 1 minute and then we'll run it. Thank you so much. Basically, the current administration has decided that we are going to do more deportations, okay? And it doesn't mean just criminal people. It means even if you have not committed a crime, if you're just out of status, okay, and your application gets denied, then you should be referred to the immigration court for removal proceedings. So there's a short news clip that I wanted to show you. Okay, media team, we're ready for that? Yes, thank you.
In the past, someone applying to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services who had a criminal past, depending on the severity, could get turned over to ICE. But now an immigrant, even with a minor offense and who, say, wrote down their wrong birth date, could be flagged and put at the front of the line for a deportation hearing. People who go to U.S.CIS are trying to become legal permanent residents or citizens. Now officers are going from application reviewers to enforcers under the new directive. This updated policy equips U.S.CIS officers with clear guidance they need and deserve to support the enforcement priorities established by the president.
Instead of welcoming people, it's putting up the wall. I think the message is you're not welcome.
Immigration attorney Amy Miller worries about due process violations and immigrants being sent to deportation hearings for subjective infractions. A notice to appear for a deportation hearing can now be given in cases of fraud, criminal offenses, unlawfully living in the U.S., or if the person's received public benefits.
It creates more fear on, community members that might be able to apply to fix their status. Now there's that added layer of fear on whether they could apply for it or not.
And if one of the officers decides to issue a notice to appear in court, the immigrant will get one pretty fast, maybe even by the end of their meeting. This directive is already in place.
What makes you love where you live?
Thank you.
It's your lifestyle, interests, food,
that
and
is what I was
entertainment.
talking about, that before, during the previous administration, the Obama administration, there used to be a prioritization of who's going to be placed in removal proceedings. If you were a criminal, then you were going to be prioritized. Now there is a broadening. So even if you're out of status and you filed for adjustment of status and you got denied, now you can be placed in removal proceedings. Notice to appear to the immigration court is being issued. So that's something that is going on. So the point is that it's very important when you file for an immigration benefit, when you file your immigration application, that you want to exercise extra caution. And I think that's the theme of all of this presentation today, that due diligence is very important. Airport screening, let's talk a little bit about that. Be very prepared. I know that a lot of us, we travel not only to Tanzania, but also for ziyarat to Iran, Iraq, and other countries. So some of those countries, they are, I think, given a priority for screening. And that's just, political reality. So we have to be prepared for the screening. Now, what can the customs officer do or cannot do at any of these screenings? What can they ask you? What can they check? If a government officer wants to come to your home or to your office and wants to do a search, do they have the right to search? They will if you let them in, right? Or if they have a warrant, right? Do they need a warrant to search you at the airport when you're entering from another country? They don't need a warrant. Why don't they need a warrant? And because of security, right? You're coming from another country, we want to inspect, we want to protect the security of our people, and so on. So that lesson is that not every right is absolute. In fact, I don't know of any right that is absolute that humans have. You know, it's all about balancing. It always gets balanced with something. So even, for example, freedom of speech, right? Can I yell fire over here when there's no fire and have everybody running? No, I can't. My right to freedom of speech doesn't justify that. So everything is balanced, right? So the same way, the government's limitation on searches is not so absolute at the airport. They can search you. So what do you do about that? How do you be prepared? Well, first of all, think about what you're taking with you. What is in, you know, I've seen a lot of cases where people have issues at the airport because the officer wanted to go through my client's cell phone. Okay? And you may not think of it, but what's in your cell phone? Maybe it's something in there that doesn't look so innocent. Maybe you thought it was something innocent, but it really wasn't. You know, I've seen clients get removed from the United States at the airport, being refused admission, because they had some stuff in here that talked about some person who was a suspected terrorist or something, or talked about some controlled substances, some weapons, you know. So you have to know what's in here, because they can search. Now, if you say, no, I don't want to give you my password, well, then that's, you have the right to do that. But then the airport screener, the customs officer, can, you know, delay your screening, right? They're going to say, okay, well, have a seat, or we'll have to confiscate this, right? So you have a choice to make, unfortunately. The law related to this is kind of in a gray area. Where does your right end and where does the government's right begin? Okay, but you as a traveler, you know, do you want to be going to court over what was searched in your cell phone? So you got to make a decision how far you're willing to exercise your right. So number one, be careful about what's in your belongings, in your items, in your purse, in your luggage, in your phone. Be careful of that. And then secondly, if let's say you are put into airport screening and you know, you're put in secondary inspection, your private belongings are being searched, then I would take the name of the officer. Ask the name of the officer. What's your name, please? Okay, and I want your badge number. All right, and let's say they want your cell phone. Well, okay, I'll give, and I want the password. Okay, I'll give you the password and the phone, but I want the name of the person who will be inspecting this phone. Okay, so what you've done by asking those types of things is you have retained some control. You haven't lost all control. Okay, so there's sort of a balancing that you can do at the airport. Also about questions. What kind of questions can the officer ask you? Can the officer ask you what country you've been to? Yeah, somebody's raising a hand. What can they ask you? By the way, are there any future lawyers here besides Adam? Anybody who's thinking about going into law? No? Okay. So they're going to need you. They can ask you about what country you've been to. Yeah, it's related to, you know, security questions. Can they ask you about what your religion is? Well, they can ask anything they want, but you don't have to answer. right? You don't have to answer what your religion is. You shouldn't have to. What does your religion have to do with national security? So I would say, no, you don't have to answer that. Can they ask you where you pray for your mosque, what mosque you go to? You don't have to answer that. You don't have to answer that. You shouldn't have to answer that. Okay? That's protected by the First Amendment, freedom of religion. So you don't have to answer questions related to your faith, your religion. All right? Okay. Some of the recent updates, we talked about the notice to appear being issued for a denial of an application and going to immigration court. So we want to be careful about how we prepare our applications. Adjustment of status. Another thing that we're seeing is that the forms are just getting longer and longer and longer, right? Remember the citizenship application? It used to be, what, 10 pages? Now it's like 20 pages long. Adjustment of status used to be a 4-page form. Now it's about 16 pages. More and more questions are being asked. And you want to be careful. You want to make sure you're filling it out properly with the right information. Because the Immigration Service, when you get to the interview, they're going to test you. They're going to ask you all those questions. And also, they're going to cross-check it with the prior applications you filed. And then they're going to, corner you. That you said this here, but before you said this, so it means you're committing fraud somewhere. Either you were lying before or you're lying now. So, due diligence. Again, that's the theme for today. And also more interviews. That's also a newer policy. For employment-based cases are now being interviewed. Before, if you had an employment-based petition, you could be approved by mail and get your green card by mail. But now they're calling you in for an interview. So more interviews. There are some more delays for asylum. Now there's a newer policy that is seeking to expedite the asylum cases. But we are seeing more delays in some types of cases. One of the types of cases we're seeing delays in, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, is the immigrant visa applications. Okay? For asylums, they're trying to remedy that, but there are many people who filed for asylum 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and those cases are still pending. Imagine that. Before they used to be interviewed within 2 months, but there's a backlog of asylum cases. So we are seeing more delays of that. Oh, how did that happen? Did I press something wrong? I think I need some help with that. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay. So, like I said, be thorough in your applications and be prepared for the interview. And, before you go to the interview, you have to be prepared because you're going to be questioned. Take all the relevant documents with you. Make sure that you have reviewed your applications. Because, for example, for marriage cases, the Immigration Service is asking a lot of questions about from the husband, from the wife. When did you meet? How did you meet? And I've seen bona fide true couples, okay, real marriages, but they walk out of the immigration office with their head hanging down, totally worried because their interview just went so badly, because there were inconsistencies, even though it was a true marriage. So it's about being prepared. Be represented, have an attorney, and your attorney should not just only go with you to the interview, but also prepare you in advance. They should do a mock interview or mock hearing with you to prepare you for the interview. And know your rights. If you're being treated badly by an immigration officer at the interview, don't hesitate to call the supervisor. Stop the interview, saying, I can't take this. This is not proper. I've got to talk to the supervisor. Okay? So you have rights. One of the things that is still working for us really well is lawsuits. We're seeing cases of delays for, I'll give you one example. Okay, one of the basis for delaying an immigrant visa, and that's where you file for your permanent residency at the embassy abroad. We're seeing delays. Why? Because of extreme vetting. Okay, the current administration implemented this policy of extreme vetting shortly after taking office. Basically, they say it's a random selection of visa applicants that they're going to be selected. There's no other issue with their visa application, but they get selected for more detailed background checks. More detailed background checks. So they get selected for that, and they're given a long questionnaire. Okay. Questions like, where have you resided? Give us all the addresses of where you have resided in the last 15 years. Give us addresses of all the places you have worked in the last 15 years. Give us addresses of each and every family member. Give us your social media handlers that you have used, Facebook, WhatsApp, anything in the last 5 years. Your email addresses in the last 5 years. So very lengthy questionnaire. And then you take your time to fill it and turn it in, and then your application will go in a black hole somewhere, and you'll be waiting for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, a year, okay? So when it becomes an unreasonable delay, then what we do is we file a lawsuit. We file a lawsuit, a mandamus lawsuit, to remedy the delay. We file this suit with the federal court to compel the State Department to act, to take the action it is supposed to take, which is to make a decision on the application. Okay? And alhamdulillah, those lawsuits are working. Once we file the suit, of course we don't guarantee anybody, but typically what we're seeing is the visa is issued. Now, if somebody has some real problem in their case, then of course I will tell them that, look, you've got this problem, and maybe don't consider the suit. But for the vast majority of our clients, the lawsuit strategy is working. You know about petitioning for family members? Petitions are taking long. First of all, when you petition for a family member, first step is to get that petition approved, right? And then the next step is to file for the immigrant visa at the embassy or at the State Department. And then, unless if you're an immediate relative, then there's a long priority date. There's a long backlog. Siblings are waiting 14 years, to get their immigrant visa. That's how long it is backed up. So in those cases where there's a long priority date, long backlog, your family member may want to consider alternative options to getting here. Employment visa, business visa, investor visa. So that's something that they would want to consult an immigration attorney about. So those visas often go faster, so they can consider that to come to the U.S. on a short term, and then your petition for them as a family can still work as a long-term option. Give you talked about that. And I think that's it. That's all for my updates. So I'd love to take any questions that you have and answer those questions. This is the most important part, so that we can help you. Please keep in mind that this program, I think, is live. Am I correct, Brother Mahmoud? It is live, so whatever you say, it's being heard by everybody. So if you have any question that you don't want to ask in public, that's fine. You can call me. My number is on the flyers, and we can, or you can email me, and we can deal with it privately if you wish. But if you want to ask me now, alhamdulillah, I'll be happy to help.
Just raise your hand, and he will bring you the microphone.
Okay.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Brother Shahzad, you mentioned in your preliminary thing that at the airport, if you are asked about your religion or what mosque do you go to, you do not have to answer the question. Fair enough, that is my right to not answer. But what if I do? Does it have any negative or any alternative? Or what if somebody asks me, what mosque do I go? Can I just say, yes, I go to HIC or whatever? Will it matter? Will it have any implication, basically?
Well, when you answer a question, then it opens a door for more questions along that line. That's one concern, that, then they may ask you more questions along those lines about HIC and not that there's anything wrong with the mosque or HIC itself, but, why be cornered into answering those questions? Secondly, why should the government ask you that question? Are they discriminating? Is the officer discriminating? They shouldn't do that. So those are basically the concerns about those questions.
Just a quick follow-up. What should be your typical response to a question like that? How should you respond?
Oh, you
Instead of just
say
saying
very simply that I feel uncomfortable talking about my religion, or I feel uncomfortable answering that question. That is my private matter.
Assalamu alaikum. Once again, at the airport, do you have to, especially with global entry, in the past you had to fill out forms and write what countries you've been to. Now they simply ask you what countries you've been to. Do you have to tell them all the countries you've been to? Say I'm in London for a week and then come from London here. Before that I've been to, say, for ziyarat to Iraq or Iran. Do you have to declare all those countries, or you can just say silent?
What is the question that is asked on it?
Yeah, say they ask you what countries have you visited before entering United States.
Yeah, I would have to read that question to be able to tell you how to answer it. Sorry, I don't remember how it's worded exactly.
Yeah. Nowadays they ask you verbally, especially if you've got global entry, you're not writing anything or filling out any questionnaires. They just give you a ticket and the officer just asks you verbal questions. Where have you been? What are you carrying with you? That was the case on my last trip.
Yeah.
So do you have to tell them what countries you've been to, or just the last country would suffice?
It depends on the question. But you know why they ask you those questions about what countries you've been to? It's because, for security reasons. There are some countries, for example, where there are certain designated organizations on their list that operate there. And so, depending on what you answer, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be an automatic denial. For example, if you say you've been to Yemen or someplace, it doesn't mean you're automatically going to get denied. It means it's a basis for further questioning about what your activities were and why you went there and so on. Citizenship delays? Anybody? Oh, you have a question, sir?
Assalamu alaikum. Just wondering if you'd please elaborate a bit on the business visas, because there's 3 different ones here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, the non-immigrant visas?
Yeah, the business visa.
L1, E2?
And the EB5, yeah.
And the last one, EB5?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, on my list, I have a few of them mentioned. The L1 is the L1 and E2 are non-immigrant visas. Okay. The L1 is an intra-company transferee, meaning that if somebody has a business abroad and they want to open up a U.S. office of that business, then they can seek to transfer themselves as the executive or manager or employee of specialized knowledge to the U.S. office. So they can establish an office in the U.S. and seek to transfer themselves. Now, easier said than done, because there are technical requirements. You have to satisfy the definition of executive or manager or employee of specialized knowledge. I was talking to one of you, to Brother Mahmoud, about that in general. So you have to meet those requirements. And a lot of times there's a requirement for staffing, that you have subordinate staff in the foreign company, or that within 1 year of your transfer, you will have supporting staff in the U.S. office. So the L1 basically is an intra-company transferee and often requires staffing. The E2 is for treaty nationals, nationals of those countries that have a business treaty with the United States, and they're coming to make a substantial investment, which there's no minimum amount for that, but it could be even $100,000 or less. It could be purchase of a gas station, a child care business, laundromat, a small business often works for the E2. But you have to be a national of a treaty country. Tanzania does not have a treaty, a business treaty with the United States. So you will need some other kind of nationality. Pakistan does have a treaty. India does not. UK does. A lot of European countries do have a business treaty with the US. So if you are a national of a treaty country, then you can consider the E2 non-immigrant visa. It's a very good option. I do it a lot for my clients. The EB5 is for immigrant visa. It is for permanent residency. It does require a high amount of investment, $1 million or $500,000 in some cases. But it does have, again, several requirements. It has several requirements. Okay? It has to create 10 jobs. And also the processing of it takes time. Right now there's a long backlog for EB5 cases. A lot of, which country nationals uses the most EB5s? And it does not require a treaty, so anybody from any country can avail themselves of that. China, I think about 80% or more of the EB5 investors are Chinese. So, many of them are settling in the West Coast, along California. So that's the business. Those are the business visa options. So which is the best? Well, it depends on which requirement you can satisfy, and also what your goal is. Okay. So that's the consultation I have to do with my client to determine which one is the best one for them.
We have a question over there. What countries are we not allowed to visit as a U.S. citizen?
Are you not allowed to visit? I don't think there's a country that you're not allowed to visit, but there's something about, there are certain countries that are considered, that are on the State Department advisory, that if you go there, then that's going to put you under, under scrutiny because there's some activity going on. And I think somebody from here if they're willing to share their story, disclose it. Somebody from here was thinking about traveling to Iran, but then they were considering that. If anybody wants to share that? Okay. So if you know, Iran is one of those countries that is under the State Department advisory. So it's not that you can't go there, but you have to be prepared to be questioned about why you went there. And a lot of times there's a legitimate reason. You know, you're going there for religious purposes. Oh, Syria? Oh yeah, Syria is there's a war issue going on there. Another question? Yeah.
I plan to visit Dubai, Malaysia, Iran, Iraq this summer.
Adam, could you please give her the
Yeah.
speaker? Thank you. The microphone.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I plan to visit Dubai, Iraq, Iran, Malaysia, everywhere. Will it raise some red flag because all Muslim countries, Iraq, Iran, Malaysia, like thrown together? Will it like?
Yeah, so be prepared to answer that. What was the purpose of your trip? You know, they can ask you about what the purpose of your trip was.
Holiday and ziyarat. That's why I'm visiting my children.
Yeah.
There.
That's a legitimate reason.
Yeah, I have my children, my family there. I'm visiting.
Yeah. So I'm not saying you shouldn't go. It's just that you know you're going to be prepared to answer those questions.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, gentleman.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum.
Just a quick question on one of your slides. I think it was the asylum slide. It had EAD. What does that stand for?
Employment authorization documents. Employment authorization, because the asylum applications are being delayed so much, so that when you apply for your work authorization, now the DHS is giving you 2 years of work authorization instead of 1 year. So that was an update on that one. You know, if sometimes there are naturalization delays for your citizenship case, that case gets delayed, and by law, the USCIS has 120 days to decide your application from the date of the interview. 120 days from the date of the interview to decide your application. And so if you're waiting, it's been more than 120 days, you have the right to file a petition with the federal court to have the federal judge take jurisdiction of your citizenship case. And in almost all of these cases, once you do that, then the Immigration Service will go ahead and process your citizenship case. A lot of times the file is delayed because of background checks, or maybe it's sitting there, nothing's happening with it.
Just asking what are the disadvantages of not becoming a U.S. citizen?
What are the disadvantages of not becoming a U.S. citizen?
Of not being a U.S. citizen?
Not becoming a U.S. citizen.
Okay, so if you're not becoming a U.S. citizen, what have you got to lose? Well, sometimes it's better for you not to be a U.S. citizen. For example, if sometimes I have clients come to me who have certain criminal convictions, okay? And if you file for citizenship, then the USCIS will find out that you are deportable, and you'll be placed in deportation proceedings as a result of filing for your citizenship. So you want to go a step forward, but you'll wind up going backwards. So that's a decision that you need to make with your lawyer about whether you should file. Also, there can be, and sorry, I'm not a tax guy, but I hear that there are certain tax disadvantages. Some people who are living overseas, they're relinquishing their citizenship of the U.S. because of tax disadvantages. But one advantage you get of being a U.S. citizen is your travel becomes easier. You have more of a peace of mind. You can vote. That's also another advantage that you have. Also, as a U.S. citizen, you can petition for your family and they will be considered immediate relatives. So if you have somebody who's waiting, who needs to be a permanent resident in your family, then your becoming a citizen may give them an advantage. And that, not with all family categories, but with certain family categories, they get an advantage.
So it's perfectly okay to just renew your green card every decade? I mean, there are no risks.
Yeah. And here's another advantage or disadvantage.
Right.
That I have some clients who are living abroad, for example, like in Tanzania or someplace.
Correct. Yeah.
They're permanent residents, and they keep coming here for a few days every 6 months just to just to avoid losing their residency. And then at some point, the U.S. Customs says to them, you can't keep doing this. Because if you're a permanent resident of the United States, you should be living here, not living abroad. But, you know, who am I to tell my client, you know, to live here when they've got a thriving business in Tanzania and that they're looking after? You know, I can't tell them to lose their livelihood, but I tell them, look, you have a choice to make. Either you maintain your residency here or you live in Tanzania. One thing you can do to try to preserve your residency is to apply for a re-entry permit. A re-entry permit allows you to be outside of the U.S. for up to 2 years at a time, so you don't have to keep coming here to touch ground to avoid losing your residency. So that's another distinction, you know, about maintaining residency. You're going to have to maintain it. Citizenship, you don't. You can live abroad for all your life, and you don't have to keep coming if you don't need to. Any more questions?
Any more questions? All right, if there's no more question, I'd like to take a moment to thank Brother Shahzad for your valuable time, and he's always been there for us as a community. Anytime we've ever needed him, and proactively, believe it or not, he calls us up and says, it's time to update you guys on what's going on. We don't even have to chase him, so your reward is only with Allah, and anytime you're welcome here, and thank you very much for everything. All right, without further ado, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
No, thank you.